Welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm Elliot Margolis, and today we're doing a show, the 5 minus 1, and of course that means 4 altogether. 3 of us, Gail, George, and myself being the smart ones, and Stuart Gardner being the liberal.
Good-looking one.
The good-looking one. All right. And today we're going to do a show talking about a little bit about Black Lives Matter, but a lot about the police, defunding the police. And on Sunday, August 16th, there was a rally at City Hall, right on the side of City Hall next to the police station. And the rally was a defund the police rally. George and I were there, and the crowd size was roughly 50 people. They were dressed in black attire. The average age of the people there was, let's say, non-taxpayer, between maybe 16 and 20 years old. 36 were female, about 15 men, about 40 whites, about 10 blacks and Latinos. And one of our friends who was there, Jim Medugno, he noticed that 11 young girls were being dropped off by their white parents driving vehicles that were valued at between $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. So his take on it was the parents must be offering up their children as penance for their white privilege. We noticed that the organization was weak. We noticed, too, that the speakers were laced with misinformation, and one speaker was clearly paranoid in instructing white marchers, because they were going to march to the Salem police station. Used all the buzzwords that were necessary and things like that. But you know, one thing I want to show you is what our friends were like there. If you look at, I'm hoping this picture comes out. There's an a guy sitting on the grass with an American flag upside down. Now, I don't care where you're from. I don't care how you feel about things. You tell me one other country that is better than the United States in evolving and doing what's right for people. This was really to me, very offensive. But, you know, that's what happened there. Then you've got this picture, I hope you can see it, which is the sidewalk next to City Hall. And notice what it says, painted on the bricks, abolish the police.
Right next to the police station.
Yeah. And you can see some signs there. The signs say defund the police and all different nasty kinds of things. But that was part of what was going on at this event. So I was pretty offended. I wonder what the mayor is thinking, allowing people to paint on the sidewalk. And one other point before I open this up, there were police there. I went over to one of the police officers and I said to him, "How does this make you feel?" And he said to me, "When I put my uniform, I feel nothing. My job is to protect everybody." He says, "When I take the uniform off, that's a separate thing. But right now I'm wearing my uniform." Okay, now I open it up. That's my monologue for today. Gail?
Well, I wasn't there. My husband actually was there, but he stayed in his car and he observed some of the things that you did. But I just want to go over, for instance, what happens to a city when they absolutely do abolish the police. And this has happened in Baltimore, Maryland. If you remember, the former uh, Congressman, John Lewis, who recently died, was from Baltimore. And for decades, he voted against every piece of criminal justice or welfare reform legislation that would have made the people of his district safer, more self-reliant, and more prosperous. But how is life in Baltimore these days? It has a murder rate that is twice as high as Chicago's per capita. They're averaging north of 350 black-on-black murders every single year, ever since they decided to defund the police. Baltimore is now the 9th most dangerous city in the world, thanks to defunding the police. There are drug-controlled, cartel-controlled cities in Mexico that are safer to visit right now than the city of Baltimore, the city where the Star-Spangled Banner was composed. So if you think defunding the police is going to be advantageous for anybody who thinks that way had better take a second long look.
George, you were at the meeting, and then we'll let Stuart rebut everything that we've talked about. But George, you were at the rally with me.
Yeah, after the rally was over, stopped to talk to one of the police officers. And it turns out that she was ordered to appear that day on overtime. And we were there about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She was working until 7 o'clock that night. I'm sorry, at midnight. And she had to be back on duty for her normal shift at 7 o'clock the next morning. So the idea of defunding the police implies that there's lots of cops around doing nothing. And in reality, there was a benefit for the Get Beverly Together group. And it was pointed out that Beverly has one of the lower ratios of police to citizens of the surrounding communities. And there's an awful lot of overtime. So it's not a flush operation that you can scrub some excess out of very easily. The other thing Gail was mentioning is that if you pull the police out, who's going to control the area? And there's a blog I got a copy of describing Chicago. And because of lots of rioting and lots of activity, the police presence in most areas is significantly reduced. So who's picking up the slack? The Latin Kings, which are not exactly your most civic-minded organization. And the question comes down to, even the natives in these areas recognize that without police protection, they're in the deep yogurt, and somebody's got to step up, and we'll start to see vigilantes running around, and we're going to end up with the Wild West.
Right, and George, you did go to the person who was running this and asked her to be on our show, and she declined. Isn't that correct?
She never got back to me. She was very reticent to even agree to do anything.
Stuart.
Okay, so theoretically, I disagree with all you guys. No rational people want to defund the police. What they want is a reallocation of money to different types of programs. I think if you talk to most reasonable people, there are fringe groups. You guys find lots of flaws in groups and people, which is easy to find. Human beings are fallible. We're all flawed. Elliot, believe it or not, you're flawed. I'm flawed just a little bit. So if you look deep, you're going to find flaws with Black Lives Matter, with defund the police. This is a question of what is wrong in our society. And what's wrong in our society is the justice system. We had this argument before. You know, the federal government is the biggest buffoon in the world, and the biggest thing you ever hear, the worst thing is I'm from the government and I'm here to help and all these things, and get rid of the federal government, except for the justice system. The war on drugs is the new Jim Crow. You talk about fatherless Black families, you talk about gangs, you talk about all these problems with the Black community. Well, you put them all in jail. Now, I get it. There is violence and there's crime, and there's problems in that community that aren't being solved and are only being solved by a for-profit industry. I did a little research, and there's two companies that are actually traded on the stock exchange that lobby all over Florida and all over the South, and one of them paid over $3 million to support a 3 strikes out law in Florida. Not because they want to be heavy on crime, but because they make money on everyone that's put in prison. This is a money system. This is like what we have done is we've said, you know what? Anyone that slightly breaks the law, especially if you're Black, we're going to put in prison, and we're going to make lots of money on you, and be damned the consequences. Gail, you're right. Chicago sucks. Baltimore sucks. Why? Because all these communities, the investment isn't there. You've taken all these people and you put them in the system that is broken. And that's the issue here. Not Black Lives Matter, not all these other problems, not people's names, not defund the police, not the 50 kids with the rich parents, but a system that is broken.
Okay, let's talk about the system that's broken. All the cities, Baltimore, Detroit, Los Angeles, Chicago, Portland, Minneapolis, all run by Democrats, who have been in office for the past 50 or 60 years. What have the Democrats done? They've promised better education. They've promised jobs. They've promised taking care of all the problems that are in the big city. And guess what? They haven't done it. As Donald Trump said running in 2016, what do you have to lose?
Elliot, federal sentencing guidelines are all run by the federal government. It's all set up. States used to be able to do their own sentencing guidelines. They can't. There are now minimum sentences governed by the federal government. We're just putting people in jail. There's got to be a better way to deal with people that are outside the system, that have petty crimes. I get it. You want to put the violent people away. But you can't tell me that 100% of the people in those prisons are all so violent that they can't live in today's society. I'm just going to guess that at more than half we could rehabilitate easily. But we don't want to do that because we make $28,000 a year on every prisoner that's in the system.
Yeah, but Stuart, you have to understand something. New York City is a good example. Look what's happening in New York City. It's being destroyed. And what does the mayor of New York City do? He lets them out of prison. He lets these felons, these rapists, out of prison. Is that what you really want? So they can go uninhibited and commit more crimes because he won't allow the police to stop it. So that's just New York City. Now, you can shake your head and make little feeble remarks, but that's the truth. Let me read you something. Let me read you 2 quotes, very short quotes. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then we will burn down the system and replace it, all right? I just want Black liberation and Black sovereignty by any means necessary. This was a quote from Hank Newsom, the leader of Black Lives Matter Greater New York chapter, from the New York Post, June 25th. There's one more. New York Times writer Nicole Hannah-Jones on the riots. Destroying property, which can be replaced, is not violence. What kind of cockamamie remarks are those?
I think it's crazy, Gail. But I think it's crazy to associate that with the group. I got something for you guys, because you all get mad at Black Lives Matter. So I'm going to say some names to you: Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Poor People's Campaign, NAACP Youth Council, Committee for Appeal on Human Rights, Atlanta Student Movement, Black Panther, Students for Non-Violating Coordinating Committee. These are all, there's like 6 more. They're all organizations that were part of the civil rights movement back in the 1960s.
Let me just tell you something about the SPLC, Stuart, because I know personally what they're all about. They started out as a good group, but they have evolved into nothing but a hate group.
Well,
They came here to Brooksby, okay, to give a speech. And what were they handing out? They were handing out maps of where the hate groups are. And most of them, if not all, were conservative groups. They even had a hate mark against Dr. Ben Carson. That's what the SPLC has evolved into.
What my point was, Gail, is that you guys get hung up on Black Lives Matter when the movement is about a change to the system. And here's the reality. It started out
that way, Stuart, but it's evolved into something else.
Yeah, but just putting people on opposite sides with guns, Gail, just means war.
What do you mean, opposite side? These people, the police are trying to protect the citizens.
Right.
And they're not allowed to do it. They can't use guns. They can't even use mace or pepper spray. They're not allowed to by the Democrat mayors in these cities.
Well, most protests are mostly peaceful. There are groups that are violent on both sides.
Then just try and explain the millions and millions of dollars of damage done in these big cities. Portland, 90 days in a row of violent protests. George, it's your turn. You haven't talked in a while.
There's too many false ideas that are being thrashed around, and nobody is challenging them. You started off, Stuart, with the idea that, oh, we're going to take some of the money from the police department and we're going to redirect it. And the usual answer is, well, we should send in social workers to take care of some of these situations. The worst situation an officer has to respond to is a domestic disturbance. The chief mentioned personally that he's gone into situations when he was a street officer, and he's got smacked in the back of the head with a frying pan. And there was a case in Texas where 2 officers responded to a domestic disturbance. They both got shot and killed. There are many cases where this is a very difficult situation. The police are trained to handle these kind of situations. Social workers are not. You're leading the lambs to the slaughter. The other one that really gets me is the officer that was kneeling on George Floyd's neck had 18 complaints against him. The mayor of Minneapolis said, I can't do anything about this because of the union contracts. Who's the guy that negotiates that union contract? It's him. They have been talking a good story, as Elliot pointed out, and they don't do anything about it. You got to walk the talk, and that's what they're really failing to do. And this whole idea that we're going to burn the cities and make everybody do something. I got a blog from a gentleman that's living in Minneapolis, and he talked about the riots in 1965 when Plymouth Street, a mile long, got burned out. It's all the small businesses on the street that were gone. Nothing is left of that street to this day but one funeral home. And they just went in, they burned out 6 miles of Lake Street. It's not going to recover. The guys that can get some insurance pack up their marbles and move to the suburbs, and they leave the debris behind. Chicago's got the same story. And what it comes down to is every time they have one of these riots, and there's been many of them, they always get a commission together and they think about it very seriously, and they come up with all these good suggestions and do nothing. And we end up with the same thing over and over again. Same recommendations are totally ignored. That's Einstein's theory of insanity. You keep doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. We have got to address this problem seriously, not with all these sound bites.
I think you're preaching my story, George. I'm saying the system's broken. You know, and I agree. I think, look, I don't want a social worker to go into the problem. But, you know, I remember even as a kid, there were 2 cops in every car, right? Now there's 1 cop in every car. Maybe we need to go back to 2 or even 3 people in a car that respond. You know, maybe there has to be better reporting of what happens. Maybe there should be a peacekeeper who is not armed.
54, where are you? Yeah.
I don't like, but you know, creative solutions about how to deal with these issues, as opposed to, you know, just saying, oh well, they're dumb and they're violent and they're stupid.
What do you think is the problem?
I think the problem. I think the problem is that when the only 2 you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, George. And these cops go in, and I have lots of friends and clients and relatives that are cops. All right,
enough of the cliches and the fancy comments. What do you think is the specific problem?
I think putting black people in jail for minor crimes is the problem. I think we need to stop doing that. I think we need to get rid of the for-profit prison system. I think we need swift justice. If you get a ticket, you should sit in the back of the police car, take care of it right then, because these people make minimum wage, and you take 2 days off to go to court, that's half their paycheck that week.
Okay, but
that's the problem.
But Stuart, every single situation that we've heard of lately in Minneapolis and Portland, etc., have been situations where the person who is being arrested has resisted arrest. Okay? And in a couple of the cases, they resisted arrest while high on drugs. Okay? Some people have to take responsibility for that. And it's not the cops. How can you take money away from training and then say they're not trained well? Or how can you take money away from the police and redirect it someplace else when, in fact, if you redirect it someplace else, you're not going to have a cop come when you need them?
And what are you going to do when violence comes to your neighborhood? I got an email from a friend who lives in Seattle, and she's lived there for over 30 years. And she said she can't even fly a flag off her porch because she's been insulted and even accosted. Now, she lives in a neighborhood of $1 million homes. She's going to leave because she said now there are addicts parking their cars on her street in her neighborhood, using heroin and live in their cars, tossing garbage and toilet paper out the windows. And you know what a police officer told her, one of her neighbors? They can't do anything as the cars have been ruled homes and they cannot accost the residents. So that's what these things evolve into.
I get it, Gail. I think it's terrible. That's a mental health issue. We've avoided all these people for 30 years. They kicked them all out of the mental hospitals. You put the black people in prison.
Who did it but the Democrats, right?
You guys in charge. What's he doing? He's like the law and order president.
He's been in office for 4 years.
He's the law and order president claiming all this stuff.
Who's had prison reform?
He cannot.
Trump has had prison reform. Obama didn't do it. Obama had 8 years. Didn't do a darn thing.
No one's done. No one's. There's still.
He didn't do anything for him.
There's a lot to do, but maybe Stuart, if the Democrats would say, you know what, it's time to work for the people instead of for the party, maybe we could get Democrats and Republicans together and work out the problem. But no, as long as Trump is president, you're not going to work with him because you don't like him. And that's not doing us, the people of this country, any good whatsoever. You can respond to it.
Well, I sort of disagree. I think Mr. Trump is just as adamant about not working with Democrats. Democrats are adamant about not working with Mr. Trump.
He has put his hand out, Stuart, and they chop it off. Every time he approaches Nancy Pelosi, she turns her back on him. She rips up papers on him. She refuses to have anything to do with him. And you know something? That is bad for the people. When you have the Speaker of the House acting the way she does, and constantly condemning the president, That's never going to work.
Mr. Trump incites violence. He's trying to
No,
create.
he does not.
He retweets QAnon stuff. QAnon thinks Democrats are satanic pedophiles.
What he does is he fights back.
Satanic pedophiles, Gail.
And
Satanic
he is after the
pedophiles.
deep state, and that's what rankles Democrats. He
No.
doesn't. I mean, they have been after him before he even got elected. So don't give me that stuff.
Yeah, Gail,
Don't give it to me.
he retweets crap all the time. He's got to stop. He's the president of the United States.
How else is he
He
supposed
fights
to
back.
do anything?
You know, I love it when people say that, Elliot. It has nothing to do with fighting back. He fights back. You can fight back with intellectual comments. You can fight back with good points. All he does is retweet crap that incite the dog whistles to white supremacists, to the
You
far
know,
right groups, to
you-
QAnon.
All you're doing is repeating the Democrat line. We've seen it
It's true.
in the mainstream media all the time. Come up with something authentic, Stuart.
It is. It's
Something authentic.
true.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have 2 minutes to go. Everybody gets 30 seconds. Gail, you go last and close it out. George, go ahead.
Just
George?
talking about sound bites, the stuff you hear out of your echo chamber, I'm still waiting for a clean answer is, what is the specific problem? We're not going to decriminalize petty crime just so we can keep the population down and put a couple of companies out of business who happen to run jails. That's not a solution. I'm still waiting for a real problem definition, and then the solution is obvious.
All right, Stuart, go ahead. I may give up my 30 seconds. To give
So,
it to Gail.
you know, putting personal responsibility aside, first there was slavery, right? Then there was Jim Crow laws, which was effectively slavery. You couldn't get a job, you couldn't own a home. Then there was the war on drugs, which was the brilliant Jim Crow law, which basically put anyone, you know, if you did crack cocaine, you ended up going to jail for a long time. And I get it. There is an element of personal responsibility in this. But right now there's a whole group of people that think they're getting the shaft, and you guys got nothing to say to them other than, you know, F you, listen to your president.
Well, that's not true, but Gail, why don't you end up the show?
Okay. Let me just make a comment about that. I recall seeing a mother, I think it was in Ferguson, Missouri, when she saw her child out there demonstrating. She went over and she grabbed him and gave him a slap or two and told him to go home and stop all this ridiculous nonsense. Because these young people don't have a clue as to what they're doing. They have no sense of history, none of that. So I think better education certainly is what we have to start doing. With that, I want to thank you all for having a almost non-combatant.
Spirited.
We
Good
almost
thing
did
we're on
it.
Zoom, we can't reach each other.
But we'll be back again with our What's Happening show very soon. So we thank you all for watching. Good night, everybody.
Good night.